The monitor beeped once every 4 seconds. It had been doing that for 1,462 days. The hallway outside room 714 on the 7th floor of Grady Memorial Hospital smelled the same at 2 in the morning as it did at midnight. Disinfectant, latex. Something underneath both of those things that had no name, but that anyone who had spent enough time in a hospital could identify without being told what it was. A man moved through that hallway with a mop. Slow, even strokes. The kind of movement that belonged to someone who had stopped thinking about the movement a long time ago. His uniform was gray. His shoes were black, with white soles that had been replaced twice in 4 years. He did not wear headphones. He did not hum. He pushed the mop bucket forward, and the wheels made a low, wet sound against the tile floor, and that was the only sound he made. He stopped at the door to room 714. He pushed it open with one hand. He left the bucket in the hallway. Inside, the room was dim. A single fluorescent light above the bed cast everything in a pale yellow that made the white sheets look almost green. The woman in the bed did not move. She had not moved on her own in 4 years. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the ventilator. Her left hand rested at her side, fingers curled inward, as if she were holding something no one could see. The man walked to the side of the bed. He straightened the edge of the blanket, where it had folded over near her feet. He did this without looking. His hands knew where to go. Then he pulled the chair closer. He sat down. "Good evening," he said. "It rained today. Not the kind that cools things off, the kind that just makes everything heavier." He paused. "I'll be back tomorrow." He stood. He tucked the edge of the blanket one more time. He walked back to the hallway, picked up the mop, and continued down the corridor. No one was watching. That was the point. His name was Isaiah Coleman. He was 62 years old. He had been working the night shift at Grady Memorial for 11 years, the last 4 of which he had spent on the 7th floor neurology and long-term acute care, and in that time he had developed a precise and unremarkable routine that began at 10 in the evening and ended at 6 in the morning, and had not varied in any significant way since the day he was assigned to that floor. He started on the east stairwell. He worked his way west. He mopped the main corridor in sections, moving the yellow caution sign ahead of him as he went. He emptied the biohazard bins in rooms 701 through 712 before midnight. He sanitized the doorknobs and light switches with a cloth he kept folded in quarters in his left breast pocket, a different cloth from the one he used for surfaces. He had been doing this since before the hospital updated its infection control protocols to require it. No one had asked him to do it. He had simply noticed that doorknobs were touched more than surfaces and acted accordingly. Room 714 was always last. Not because the work there was different, because he gave it more time. Isaiah Coleman made $17 an hour. After taxes, that came to approximately $2,040 a month. He worked 6 nights a week. He had worked 6 nights a week for 11 years. With the exception of 4 days, he took off when his father had a stroke in the winter of his 3rd year, and 3 days the following spring when his father had a second one. He did not own a car. He took the number 71 bus from West End to the hospital, a ride of approximately 90 minutes each way, leaving his apartment at 8:15 in the evening and arriving home between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, depending on transfers. He slept from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. His father, whose name was Earl, woke at 6 and needed help with breakfast, medication, and the 2 steps from his bedroom to the living room chair where he spent most of the day. Isaiah was home for that. He had arranged his entire life to be home for that. The bus fare was $2.50 each way, $5 a day, $30 a week. He had calculated this a long time ago and stopped calculating it because the number did not change, and thinking about it did not make it smaller. There was a notebook on the table beside Naomi Brooks's bed. A small thing, blue cardboard cover, the kind sold in packs of 3 at drugstores for a few dollars. Isaiah had put it there in the first week. He had not asked permission. He had simply placed it on the table, and that night, after he pulled the chair close and sat down, he had opened to the first page and written the date and the weather and 1 or 2 things he had seen that day. He did this every night. By the end of the first year, the notebook was full. He bought another one, same kind, same blue cover. He stacked them. By the time 4 years had passed, there were 4 notebooks, one for each year. He kept the current one in his breast pocket during his shift and placed it on her table when he came in and took it back when he left. The others were in a shoebox under his bed at home. He did not think of this as extraordinary. He thought of it as what you did when a room had a person in it. His mother had taught him this. Her name was Isaiah Coleman, and she had worked as a nursing assistant at a memory care facility in Decatur for 22 years. Isaiah had visited her there once when he was about 9 years old, and he had watched her sit beside an elderly woman who had not recognized her own daughter in 3 years. His mother had held the woman's hand and talked about the weather and what she had had for lunch and what the azaleas looked like that spring. The woman had not responded. She had stared at the ceiling. His mother had talked anyway. On the bus home, Isaiah had asked her why. She had said, "A room always deserves tending, even when no one is hoping anymore." He had not understood it then. He understood it now. If what Isaiah believed was right, then Naomi Brooks had been hearing more than anyone in that building knew. Stay with me. Isaiah had started a nursing program at Georgia Perimeter College when he was 23 years old. He had finished his first year with a B average and begun his second before his sister called from Cincinnati to tell him that her kidneys were failing and that the dialysis center near her apartment had a 3-month wait and that she did not know what to do. Her name was Diane. She was 20 years old. She had moved to Cincinnati for a job at a distribution warehouse and had not told anyone she was sick because she had not wanted to be a burden, and by the time she told Isaiah, the situation was further along than she had let on. Isaiah left school at the end of that semester. He moved to Cincinnati. He worked at a hospital there, not as a nurse, not yet, in the laundry department, and he helped Diane manage her appointments and her medications and the paperwork that came with being uninsured and sick in a city where you did not know anyone. He had intended to go back to school when things stabilized. Things stabilized, and then they destabilized again, and then his father's health began to decline, and by the time he looked up, it was 15 years later, and the window for finishing the program had not closed exactly, but it had moved to a place he could not reach without leaving behind everything he was currently holding together. He did not talk about this. He had stopped thinking of it as loss. It was simply a fact about his life. The way the bus fare was a fact, and the 90 minutes each way was a fact. You do not grieve a calculation. You make it, and then you live inside the result. Naomi Brooks had been 22 years old when the accident happened. She had been driving home from a late shift at a bakery in Little Five Points. It was a Thursday. The other driver had run a red light. The impact had been on the driver's side. She had been airlifted to Grady and had not regained consciousness since. Her left hand had been closed when the paramedics found her. It had remained closed. The neurologists noted it in her chart as a resting posture, possibly a stress response from the moment of impact, possibly nothing. No one could say for certain. Isaiah had noticed it on the first night. He had noticed it on every night since. He had never touched it. He sat beside her and he talked, and at the end, he straightened the blanket and he left, and the hand stayed closed, and he came back the next night, and the hand was still closed, and he talked again. If there was something she was holding, he had decided, it was hers to hold. Victor Brooks arrived at Grady Memorial on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of March. He was 57 years old, but he looked older by a margin that had been increasing since his wife died. His name was known in Atlanta. He had built a logistics company from a single warehouse in College Park into an operation that employed over 4,000 people across 7 states. He had donated a rehabilitation wing to this hospital in his wife's name 3 years ago. His name was on a plaque in the lobby. He came when there was news. He came when the doctors called. Between those visits, the hospital had his number and his assistant's number and a standing authorization to call either one at any hour. He did not come on ordinary nights. There was no reason to. Nothing changed on ordinary nights. He met with Dr. Renee Wallace that Tuesday in a conference room on the 4th floor. Dr. Wallace was the head of neurology. She had been Naomi's primary physician for 2 years. She was direct in the way that people are direct when they have delivered this particular category of news enough times to have stopped softening it in ways that don't help. She told him that the hospital was recommending a transfer to a long-term care facility. Naomi's condition had not changed in 2 years. Grady's acute care unit was not designed for indefinite long-term placement. There were facilities that specialized in this. She had a list. Victor sat across the table from her, and did not speak for a long time. He had heard this before. He had heard variations of it for 4 years. Each time, he had brought in another specialist, he had funded another study. He had located a trial, a protocol, a technology that was not yet widely available. He had not run out of options so much as he had reached the edge of the category of problems that money could reach into and pull things out of. He said, "Are there any remaining treatment protocols we haven't attempted?" Dr. Wallace said, "Not within the current standard of care." He said, "I need data, not hope." She said, "I understand. That's why I'm telling you this." Outside the conference room, the hallway was being mopped. The sound of the bucket wheels was faint through the closed door. Victor did not notice it. Isaiah was working his way toward the elevator. He had heard the voices through the wall when he passed the conference room. He had not slowed down. He had pushed the mop bucket forward, and the wheels had made their low sound, and he had continued. He already knew about the transfer. One of the nurses had mentioned it the week before, not to him specifically. She had been talking to another nurse at the station, and he had been emptying the bin near the door, and she had said they were probably moving. The girl in 714 at the end of the month and the other nurse had said that poor father, and neither of them had looked at Isaiah. He had pushed the bin cart down the hallway and into the service elevator and pressed the button for the basement and stood there while the doors closed. The elevator hummed. The cable tensed. He had not decided anything yet. He had only stood there. He went over it the way he went over everything on the bus, in the back row, city still dark, other passengers asleep or not paying attention. He had been sitting with her for 4 years. He had the dates, he had the notebook. And he knew something no chart had written down. He knew it the way you know things you cannot prove from repetition, from 4 years of sitting in the same chair in the same room and paying attention to the same hand. Her left hand loosened when he talked. Not always, not dramatically, but enough that he had written it down the first time it happened, and the second time, and every time after that. If she moved to a long-term facility, no one there would know to watch for it. No one there would have 4 years of sitting in the dark to compare it against. That was the whole calculation. What he stood to lose was real. He had a father at home and a bus fare and an apartment in West End and nothing under any of it. If he was wrong, if a room full of doctors looked at a janitor and heard nothing worth hearing, the floor could be taken from him. The access, the chair. 3 nights he went back and forth. On the 4th, he walked to the nurse's station and asked if Dr. Wallace was available. She was not. She was in a meeting. He said he would wait. He waited 22 minutes. He stood near the station with his hands at his sides. One of the younger nurses asked if he needed something and he said, "No, thank you, I'm waiting for Dr. Wallace." She looked at him for a moment and then went back to what she was doing. Dr. Wallace came out of the meeting room at 12:47. She saw him standing there. She was already moving toward the elevator. She stopped. She said, "Mr. Coleman." She knew his name. She had worked at this hospital for 14 years. She had worked a summer in the laundry room and 2 semesters in housekeeping during college, and she had not forgotten what those jobs looked like from the inside or who did them. He said, "I think she responds to voice." The hallway light at the far end flickered once. Nobody looked up. He did not look at her directly after he said it. He was looking at the mop bucket, still sitting in the hallway where he had left it. The water in it had gone cold an hour ago. He said, "I've been sitting with her at night. 4 years. I talk to her. And there are nights I have the dates when her left hand loosens while I'm talking. Not during vitals. Not during the doctor's visits. At night. When it's quiet. When I'm talking." Dr. Wallace looked at him. She did not say he was wrong. She did not say he was right. She stood in the hallway at 12:48 in the morning, and she looked at this man in a gray uniform who had just told her something that no one had put in a chart in 4 years. She said, "You have dates?" He reached into his breast pocket. He took out the blue notebook. Dr. Wallace did not tell Victor Brooks about Isaiah Coleman that night. She ordered a new round of auditory response testing first. She wanted data before she had a conversation that could not be untaken. The test was scheduled for that Thursday. Naomi was played a series of tones at varying frequencies, then a series of words, then a sentence, then a voice. Isaiah's voice. Dr. Wallace had asked him to record 3 sentences on her phone. He had stood in the hallway outside her office and said, "Good evening. It rained today. I'll be back tomorrow." The playback was at low volume. The room was quiet. On the third sentence, Naomi's left hand moved. Not much, a fraction of a second variation in muscle response. The technician leaned forward. She checked the reading. She checked it again. She said, "Run it again." They ran it again. The hand moved again. Victor Brooks was called in on Friday morning. Dr. Wallace sat across from him in the same conference room. She told him what Isaiah had observed. She told him about the notebook. She told him about the test results. Victor sat very still. He was looking at the table. There was a cup of coffee in front of him. Someone had put it there before the meeting. It had been sitting long enough that a ring had formed where the heat had condensed against the surface. He was not looking at Dr. Wallace. He was looking at the cup. His wife had been in a hospital room for 6 months before she died. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, and nothing that money could outpace. He had been there for every specialist's visit, every treatment decision, every conversation with a doctor in a room like this one. He had held her hand, and he had made calls, and he had done everything that a man with his resources could do. There had been a night near the end when he had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed and woken up at 3 in the morning to find a woman he did not know sitting on the other side, a small woman, older, in scrubs. She had been talking quietly. Not to him, to his wife. Just talking. About nothing. About the night outside and what she had had for dinner and something she had read. His wife's eyes had been open but unseeing, and this woman had been talking to her as if she could hear every word. He had not asked her name. He had not thanked her. He had sat in his chair and watched, and then he had fallen back asleep, and when he woke again she was gone, and he had never seen her again, and he had not thought about her in years until this moment, sitting in this conference room, looking at a cooling cup of coffee. Dr. Wallace said, "His name is Isaiah Coleman. He's been on the night shift here for 11 years. Victor said, "He's been coming every night." She said, "Every night he was on shift, 6 nights a week." Victor said, "For 4 years." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I'd like to meet him." Isaiah was not expecting to be called to the 4th floor at 7 in the morning. His shift ended at 6. He had already changed out of his uniform. He was in the lobby in his street clothes, waiting for the 7:15 bus, when one of the floor nurses came down and said Dr. Wallace would like a word if he had a moment. He had a moment. He had 45 minutes before the next bus. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. He walked to Dr. Wallace's office. Victor Brooks was standing in the hallway outside it. They looked at each other. Victor was taller than he looked in photographs. He was wearing a dark jacket and no tie, and he looked like a man who had not slept. Isaiah was in his street clothes, a collared shirt, dark blue. He was carrying his jacket over one arm. Victor said, "Mr. Coleman." Isaiah said, "Yes, sir." Victor said, "I'm Naomi's father." Isaiah said, "I know." Victor said, "You've been sitting with her." Isaiah said, "Yes." Victor said, "Every night." Isaiah said, "Most nights." Victor said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know your name until this morning." Isaiah said, "I know." That was all either of them said in the hallway. Dr. Wallace came out of her office and they moved inside, and there was more conversation about next steps, about the auditory response protocol, about what it meant and what it didn't mean and what came next. Isaiah answered the questions he could answer and said he didn't know when he didn't know. Before he left, Victor said, "Mr. Coleman." Isaiah turned. Victor said, "Thank you." Isaiah looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once. He put on his jacket. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. Outside, the 7:15 bus was still 4 minutes away. He stood on the sidewalk and waited. The transfer was postponed. Dr. Wallace presented the auditory response findings to the hospital's neurology board. The response was small. It was consistent. It was not conclusive, but it was enough to warrant a revised care plan. And the revised care plan included a structured auditory stimulation protocol that Isaiah was asked, formally, to be a part of. He was given a schedule. He was given a lanyard that allowed him access to the ICU during off hours. He continued his regular shift. He continued the notebook. The notebook for year 5 had a different cover. Dr. Wallace had bought it. It was the same blue. She had not mentioned this. She had left it on the nurse's station with his name on a post-it. He had not thanked her. He had taken it and put it in his breast pocket. 6 weeks after the auditory response test, Naomi Brooks opened her eyes. Not in the way the monitors showed. She had had eye movement before. This was different. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the window. She looked at the door. The nurse on duty called Dr. Wallace at 2:41 in the morning. Isaiah was in the hallway. He had finished room 714 20 minutes earlier and was working his way toward the stairwell when he heard the call go out. He stopped at the end of the corridor. He did not go back. That was not his place. Not now. Not with the nurses and the on-call physician moving toward the room. He stood at the end of the hallway, and he waited. He could hear voices. Not words. Just voices. He stood there for a long time. Then he picked up the mop and continued to the stairwell. It took 6 weeks. The first days were fragments, then words, then short sentences that cost her something to finish. Her voice came back slowly, the way things come back that have been still for a long time. She knew her father. She knew her name. In the second week she asked about her phone and the nurse laughed from relief. In the fourth week, she asked Dr. Wallace about the voice. She said, "There was a voice. At night. A man's voice. He talked about the weather." Dr. Wallace said, "Yes." Naomi said, "Was that real?" Dr. Wallace said, "Yes." Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I thought I was dreaming." She asked to meet him in the 6th week. She had been moved out of the ICU by then. She was in a room on the 5th floor, working with a physical therapist twice a day, walking the length of the hallway with a walker in the mornings and without it in the afternoons. She was not yet ready to leave the hospital. She was further from where she had been than anyone had expected at this point. Her father had arranged for Isaiah to come during the day, on a day he was not working. Isaiah arrived at 10 in the morning. He wore the same dark blue collared shirt. He stood in the doorway of her room. She was sitting up in the bed. She was thinner than she should have been, and her left hand rested in her lap, open now, fully open, fingers flat against the sheet. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "It was your voice." He said, "I talked too much, probably." She said, "No." She reached to the table beside her bed. She picked up the blue notebook, not the new one, the old one, the first one, year 1, which her father had brought from Isaiah's shoebox. She held it with both hands. She said, "He told me you kept records." Isaiah said, "I wrote things down, yes." She said, "Every night for 4 years." He didn't answer that. There wasn't anything to say to it that would improve on the fact of it. She held the notebook out to him. He did not take it immediately. He looked at it. She said, "I want you to keep it." He said, "That was for you." She said, "I know. I want you to have it back." He took it. He held it in both hands the way she had held it. It was light, less than 100 pages of notes about weather and small daily things and a hand that sometimes loosened in the night. She said, "You're the first voice I remember." He stood in the doorway and held the notebook and did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "It rained the first night I came. I told you that." She said, "I know. I remember." He took the elevator to the 7th floor before he left. He walked the length of the corridor, past room 701, 702, the nurse's station, the family waiting area, past 712, 713. He stopped at the door to room 714. The room was empty now, clean. The bed was made with the same white sheets and the same light blanket. The chair was pushed against the wall. The table beside the bed was bare. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He did not go in. Then he turned and walked back toward the elevator. His footsteps were quiet on the tile. At the end of the corridor, through the window, the morning light was coming in flat and pale over the city. The 7:15 bus would be running. He pressed the button and waited for the doors to open.